Welcome everyone to tonight's webinar about autumn grazing management. My name is Tess McDougall and I'm a Livestock Industry Development Officer from Agriculture Victoria based in Ararat. Tonight's webinar is proudly supported by the Victorian Government's 2019-2020 Drought Support Package. If you experience audio difficulties during tonight's webinar, my suggestion is that you use your phone for audio, and if the internet allows, continue to use the webinar platform for the presentation. If you have a pen handy, it might be handy to write down this number, 1-800-896-323, and you'll then be prompted for a passcode 571-30136 and then the hash key. This number can also be found on your reminder email. Fiona will be using a PowerPoint presentation during tonight's seminar. This can be found on the Resources tab, which is the light blue button next to the hand on the webinar platform, or if you call the helpline on 1-800-733-416, it can be emailed to you. You might need that in order to follow the presentation, and the presenter will let you know what slide number we are on. For those joining the webinar platform, the presentation will appear in your browser, and the slide number is on the bottom left-hand side. After the presentation, we would be grateful if you could complete a short survey so as to ensure that we are providing you with the right information. After the seminar, you will be migrated to the short survey. If you are joining us on the phone, a link to the survey will be sent out with the recording. This seminar is hosted tonight by Redback Connect. Our Redback operator tonight is Mary Grace, and she is here to ensure that our seminar runs smoothly. There will be an opportunity for questions after the presentation, and this will be managed for us by Daniel. If you're participating on the webinar platform, you can type your questions on the Questions tab on the screen at any time during the webinar. If you're joining us on the phone, Daniel will provide instructions on how to get your questions in the queue later on. So our presenter, Fiona. Fiona has 21 years of experience in delivering on topics such as nutrient management, grazing systems, cattle nutrition and feed budgeting. Tonight's webinar we will focus on grazing management for autumn, and I'd like to thank Fiona for her involvement tonight. I will now hand over to Fiona to continue with the presentation. Thank you, Fiona.
Thanks, Tess. As we can see, the first slide in front of you, we're calling this one slide 1, so our autumn grazing management. So that's what I'm going to talk to you today about. If we flick across to our slide number 2, I've got a bit of a thinking point for you all to ponder. I always like to put up a bit of a challenge when we're talking about pastures. When it comes to a lack of pasture growth, is it that your pastures aren't growing, or is it that you're not letting them grow? So have a think about that. The photo that you might be able to see on the screen or on the slides, if you're looking at a printout of the slides, is from Gifford down in Gippsland in 2019 last year. It's an area that had been hit hard by the drought. They were lucky enough to have had some rain at this point, and exclusion cages, which is what we call those cages that's sitting over that bit of pasture, were put out in the paddock to see what might grow if stock could not constantly graze the plants. And I think what this photo really highlights is the value of stock containment areas or sacrifice paddocks when needed to allow plants to make use of the moisture that's available and to start to recover and provide valuable feed after long dry spells or as part of a fire recovery plan. As you can see, there's some really healthy pasture growth inside the cage. Yep, there's some grass, but there's also cateweed, but that's just showing what could grow if the stock weren't constantly grazing it. So they actually had sheep grazing this pasture, pretty much in a set stocking situation. You can see the pasture as such around the cage. So because they were constantly chewing it off, it just looked like nothing was growing. But if we could move those stock off that pasture and actually let it rest, what was in those cages is what could actually regrow. So that's where my challenge comes from and gets you to think about, is it my pastures aren't growing, or is it that I'm not letting them grow? Now let's take a look at understanding plant growth and pasture management to ensure we set our pastures up to provide us with the feed we need. So let's move on to slide 3. I guess before we look at pasture growth and management, we probably should address the question of can my pastures actually recover? So you might have been through a long dry spell over a summer period, or you might be recovering from fires. Can my pastures actually recover? The density of what's remaining and the time period you're looking forward will actually determine that answer for you. So how quickly do I need them to recover? Because different pastures, if I've got a 12 to 18 month time period in front of me, those pastures might recover, but if I need them to be functional in 6 months, we might have to term them as not being able to recover. Generally though, if you have a pasture, such as in the picture on the left-hand side, with low desirable plant mass, it's going to take a long time for that pasture to naturally thicken up, and it's at risk of a large amount of weed invasion compared to the paddock on the right. So you might look at that one on the left and you can see a bit of red soil, and then you can see a trash layer on it. And quite often when we talk about ground cover, we include that trash. But when we're talking about pasture recovery, we're looking at those actual clumps of plants that are alive, and can they actually tiller out, thicken up and fill out those gaps, and to the degree that we want them to provide the production we need off those pastures. As a rough rule of thumb, paddocks with less than 70% desirable plant species might struggle to thicken up and recover, even with careful management in a 12-month period, and it's very dependent on rainfall as well. These paddocks might benefit from oversowing, so anything below 70% of desirable species, you may need to oversow them to thicken them up. But how can I estimate the percentage of the desirable species in my pasture? There's a couple of ways. Either select a number of spots in the paddock and stand with your feet roughly 1 metre apart, like in those photos, and visualise a square in front and then estimate the percentage. And that can be a little bit hard to do, but generally go with your gut feel of what you think it's going to be. Another method is to walk across the paddock, throw a stick or a ruler, or just use the toe of your boot, and record what's there. So maybe every 10, 20 steps, just look down and say, all right, what's the toe of my boot touching? Is it bare ground? Is it a weed? Or is it a desirable plant that I actually want in the system? If you do this 20 times, multiply it by 5 to give you a percentage. And if you do it 50 times, then multiply by 2, and then you can decide your options from there. If we move on to slide 4, we're going to start talking about pasture management. For me, the principles of pasture and grazing management are the same no matter whether it's autumn, winter, spring or summer. It's about understanding what's best for the plant to ensure persistence in the system, and trying to balance that with animal requirements and the targets, what you're trying to get those animals to actually do and achieve. So first up, we need to remember that plants absorb carbon dioxide from the air and water from the soil and convert them to carbohydrates. So that's the food the plants actually live and grow off. So these carbohydrates are used immediately for growth, or they're stored as root reserves to be used later when they're recovering and regrowing. The rate of regrowth after grazing is going to be largely determined by the intensity of grazing, so the leaf area left to capture light to produce those carbohydrates, and the frequency of grazing, so the root reserves of the carbohydrates. So if we graze too often, we'll talk about this as we go through, the root reserves of the carbohydrates can actually be depleted if we don't allow enough leaf to regrow to replenish those carbohydrates. So just remember that plants need that leaf area to capture that sunlight and produce those carbohydrates. We move on to slide 5. I need to add a quick note in here about tillering. Just to explain what tillering is for those who might be a little unsure. I'm sure a lot of you are quite aware what it is. This picture is showing a picture of 3 ryegrass plants. Plant 1 on the left-hand side there if you look down towards the base of that plant, where the outer older leaves have been stripped back, you might just be able to see a tiny white little shoot on the left side of the stem. This is a tiller emerging. So where that black circle is, look right down the base, you should be able to see just a tiny little white stem sticking up. So that's the start of a tiller. Plant 2 in the middle is showing the tiller emerging from the sheath of the parent plant. So again, look at that black circle in the middle, and you can see that tiller is just coming out of that little sheath. And plant 3 on the right-hand side is showing the tiller as it's growing its second leaf. So you can see that in the larger circle there on the right-hand side. So perennial plants reproduce through both seed recruitment and through a process called tillering. And it's generally this tillering that gives us the majority of the density in our grass swards and is important for the persistence of our perennial pastures. So these daughter tillers are produced from the base of the parent plant, bit of a tongue twister that one, and new leaves of the parent plant form from the centre of that plant. So if you're trying to look at a grass and you're trying to work out, is it a tiller growing or is that a new leaf? Just remember, tillers come off the side, like in those photos, and the new leaf will come from the centre of that stalk of that grass. Tillers can form any time of the year, but most activity is seen during autumn and particularly in spring. Any tillers that are formed prior to winter are going to put up a seed head and become reproductive in spring and die. So when they go through a cold winter, that's their trigger to put a seed head up. So tillers that are formed in the spring period will not become reproductive until the following winter. It's these plants that survive and are our pastures and our feed for our stock over the next 12 months. So just remember, any tiller that's formed in autumn, so now, is going to go through a cold winter period and stick its seed head up and die in spring. But before that, hopefully it tillers out and produces daughter tillers as well. Any of those tillers that are formed in that early spring period before that seed head forms, they'll actually survive through the rest of spring, summer, autumn, the following winter, and then we'll die that following spring. So that's what gives us our thickness and our density in our perennial plant systems. And it's why it's really important to manage our pastures to enable tillering and for those plants to thicken up. So if we flick across to slide 6, you might be thinking, well, we don't have a lot of ryegrass in our pastures. Maybe we've got phalaris or cocksfoot, a whole range of different other grasses out there. But a lot of the work, I keep talking about ryegrass because a lot of the work that has been done in terms of research has been done on ryegrass. However, what they found is most of the principles that apply to ryegrass apply to our other grasses as well. So this graph in front of us, the ryegrass leaf to feed ratio, is looking at what happens as leaves regrow. So if we look at this top graph on the slide, where it's got down the side pasture mass in kilograms of dry matter per hectare, the first leaf, the top graph is looking at what proportion each leaf generally contributes to the amount of feed if the ryegrass plant is allowed to grow out to its 3 leaves. The first leaf, which is relying a lot on root and stem reserves to fuel its growth, is relatively quite small and contributes only about 15 to 25% of the overall feed. The second leaf now has a first leaf acting as a solar panel to provide additional energy and so is larger in size. So it's not just relying on the root and stem reserves, it's now also got that first leaf acting as a solar panel, producing those extra carbohydrates. And it contributes 35 to 40% of the overall feed. And the third leaf, now powered by 2 solar panels, is able to grow to a larger size again, often contributing somewhere around 40 to 50% of the overall feed. So just imagine if you're grazing your pastures too early, how much feed you're actually missing out on. The little comment off to the side there where it says tip, the first leaf contributes less when using low nitrogen inputs or grazing below target residuals. This has to do with how much of the stem reserves are eaten into as well, particularly where we're talking about grazing below target residuals. The harder the plant is grazed down, the less energy reserves are available to push out and support the growth of that new leaf. And it can be a very important point to consider in times of the year where growth is naturally slower, such as the summer and winter periods. And it's much less of an issue in spring where pastures just grow so fast. Nitrogen, that little comment about nitrogen, nitrogen actually causes an increase in the size of a leaf. So if your plants are growing in a low nitrogen environment, you don't have any clover in the system, and then you don't use urea either, you actually tend to end up with smaller leaved plants because they need that nitrogen to be much larger, which is why we tend to encourage having that up to 30% clover in the system to provide that nitrogen to the grasses. The bottom graph shows what is happening in the plant itself. As the plant pushes out the first new leaf after grazing, it is relying on some of the energy reserves held in the root and the stem, depleting the overall energy reserves in the plant. At this stage, the grass hasn't had a chance to replenish reserves. So if grazed again at this stage, again relying on what is left of the stem and root reserves, the new emerging leaf will be smaller and roots will be dying off in the soil. As the plant is allowed to grow out to that second leaf, it now has the ability to use the leaves as solar panels to generate energy and supply that energy back down into the roots and into the stem reserves. The ryegrass plants can be grazed once they have grown their second leaf, without damaging the individual plant to any degree. But are you getting the most from your pasture system? As you can see on that graph, it's not until the ryegrass plant pushes out its third leaf that it generally has enough energy to consider tillering out. So if we often graze before that third leaf is grown and tillering has not occurred, we can end up with pastures that are not as thick as we think they should be. And that leads a lot towards persistence of our pastures as well. So plants also need light to reach that growing point of the plant, which is found at the base of a plant, to initiate tillering. And it's the same in all grasses, as well as adequate moisture and temperature. It's important in spring not to allow our pastures to become too long for too long, as often happens when we lock our pastures up for hay. So once the pasture canopy closes, light can't reach the base or the growing point and tillering slows or stops. And canopy closures where you might see it out in your paddocks that the grass grows so tall and thick and then it folds over at the top. So it looks like it's lying down on top of the grass. So once that canopy closes, light can't reach that base. And as I said, tillering slows or stops. So we get that long ranked pastures for months at a time can result in a decline in pasture density that might take years to recover. These open pastures can then allow an invasion of weed species or more undesirable annual plants, pasture plants like winter grass, barley grass, and these shorten the growing season of our pastures and reduce the quality of feed on offer to our livestock. So how grass plants grow and partition energy is an important consideration, particularly where pastures have come out of a very long dry period or any period of considerable stress, even fire recovery. If you want them to recover and go on to be productive pastures, it's important to take note of how these plants need to be treated to grow to their maximum. So if you flip on to slide 7, a little photo here of a clump of ryegrass, and we're talking about the impact of residuals, how hard we're grazing into our pastures. So in the previous slide, we mentioned that the first leaf contributes less if you have grazed below your target residuals. So what impact is this going to have on our new emerging leaf? In this case, a clump of ryegrass was grazed. It was actually cut, but we'll call it grazed, to either 1,600 kilograms of dry matter per hectare, or 6 centimetres, 1,200 kilograms of dry matter, or 4 centimetres, or 700 kilograms of dry matter, or 2 centimetres. And these kilograms of dry matter per hectare readings were based on the MLA pasture ruler. So what actually happened when regrowth occurred? So if we flick across to slide 8, what happened? When it was assessed a couple of days later, the part of the clump that had been grazed to 700 kilograms of dry matter per hectare, or 2 centimetres, had produced 2 centimetres of regrowth. The part of the clump that had been grazed to 1,200 kilograms of dry matter per hectare, or your 4 centimetres, had produced 3 centimetres of regrowth. And the part of the clump that had been grazed to 1,600 kilograms of dry matter per hectare, or 6 centimetres, had produced 4 centimetres of regrowth. So the more stem left behind, the greater the energy reserves available to support the growth of that first leaf. You just need to balance how much you're leaving behind with how much it will affect the feed quality moving forward. If you leave too much stem behind, which is lowering feed quality for stock anyway, although it may produce a larger first leaf, overall it may not be beneficial to what you're trying to achieve on farm. So you've got to find a happy medium for your own system as to where you want to be. Okay, we flick across to slide 9. We're looking at the recommended leaf stages for grazing here. So this is where, not just talking about perennial ryegrass this time, we're bringing in cocksfoot, phalaris, tall fescue, prairie grass into the system as well. Because research has been conducted to determine what leaf stages are best for the other grasses as well. Leaf stage relates to the plant's physiological readiness to be defoliated or eaten. Defoliation at the recommended leaf stage will increase plant persistence and increase dry matter production. So if we look at the table in front of us, we've got perennial ryegrass, cocksfoot, phalaris, tall fescue, prairie grass. And it says for a leaf maturity, perennial ryegrass has 3 active growing leaves at any one time. And from the research, it's shown that it's best to try and let it get out to the 3 leaf stage as much as possible. 2.5, not too bad, but the 3 leaf stage as much as possible across the year to get the best benefit out of that grass. Cocksfoot plants have 6 to 7 active growing leaves at any one time, and the best time to graze it is the 4 to 5 leaf stage to maximise production. Phalaris has a 4-leaf active growing leaf at any one time. Recommended grazing time is the 4-leaf stage. Tall fescue is also a 4-leaf plant with a recommended grazing time at the 3-leaf stage. And prairie grass is a 5 active growing leaves with the recommended time at the 4-leaf stage. And this makes it really easy. If you've just got a ryegrass pasture, very easy to manage. It gets a little bit more difficult when we've got our mixed pastures. So if we've got a bit of ryegrass and cocksfoot mixed together, or some ryegrass and phalaris mixed in together, or some prairie grass in with phalaris, or anything like that, it becomes a bit more difficult when they're, particularly if they're going to be grazed at different leaf stages. So it can be a bit of a tricky one. However, it was found that defoliation of prairie grass and cocksfoot at the 4-leaf stage resulted in greater growth rates compared to defoliation at the 2 or 3 leaf stages of regrowth. How can some of this help us plan our grazing management? The other thing just to think of is some of the grasses actually put out their leaf stage a little bit quicker than other plants, and we'll get onto that in a couple of slides' time. So if we just have a look at slide 10, again jumping back to good old ryegrass, and this table was stolen from a presentation by Lisa Warren. Many people would probably know Lisa Warren, or Lisa Warren Ag Consulting. And this table is based on research by Danny Donaghy when he worked at Tillering down in Tasmania. He did a lot of the research, as well as Bill Fulkerson, on the ryegrass plants. What this is just showing that if a plant is, it's the impact of grazing a ryegrass plant continually at like the 1-leaf stage for a year, or the 2-leaf stage, or letting it get out to the 3-leaf stage, and what impact does that have on how much feed was actually produced. For the paddock that was continually grazed at the 1-leaf stage, where stock are removed and only 1 leaf allowed to regrow, then stock returned for another grazing, that pasture produced 4.8 tonnes of dry matter, or of dry matter, 4.8 tonnes of dry matter per hectare for the year. The paddock that was allowed to grow to 2 leaves before being grazed again grew 8.5 tonnes per hectare of dry matter for the year. And the paddock that was allowed to grow out to 3 leaves grew 12 tonnes of dry matter per hectare for the year. So it comes back to the question that I posed at the start. Is it that your pastures aren't growing, or are you not letting them grow? So it just shows the difference in how much feed, I suppose, in this case, it's showing that if you graze at the 1 leaf stage all the time, you're losing up to 60% of your feed compared to allowing the ryegrass to get out to the 3 leaf stage. If you graze at the 2 leaf stage all year round, you're losing up a potential 30% of possible feed on your farm. So think about that in terms of, well, if I allowed it to grow out, how much extra feed would I have on my property? Would I end up with the same feed gaps that I see on my place now? Or could I actually run extra stock? And do I want to? So if we move on to slide 11, and this is just to harp on a little about what incorrect grazing can do to plants. So this is a photo of grass tops and of grass roots. In this experiment, they defoliated the ryegrass plants at, the 1 leaf stage all the time, the 2 leaf stage, or let them go out to the 3 leaf stage before being defoliated. So you can see not only a difference in the length of the roots between the 1 leaf on the left-hand side and the 3 leaf stage on the right-hand side. So not only a difference in the length of roots, which impacts on the plant's ability to access nutrients, and particularly water at deeper depths, but also the width of those roots as they go deeper down the profile, which gives us a much healthier, stronger plant that's able to withstand any stressful conditions compared to that 1 leaf plant. So I just like to harp on about trying to let those plants get out to their ideal leaf stage as much as possible, because it's not just good for what's above the ground, it's really good for what's below the ground as well. So let's flick across to slide 12, where we're talking about leaf emergence and recovery. Moisture impacts on the size of the leaf, whereas temperature impacts on the emergence rate. Ryegrass can range across the year, with a typical leaf appearance rate being 6 to 7 days per leaf in spring, 12 to 30 days per leaf in summer, 10 to 15 days per leaf in autumn, and 15 to 30 days per leaf in winter. So longer rest periods are required during summer when moisture is limiting, and in winter when soil temperature is limiting. So one's moisture, one's temp. You can work out the leaf appearance rate on your plants by counting the leaves. Have a look 14 days post-grazing at a paddock and see how many whole leaves with tips, with what the tip of a grass tends to look like, not chewed blunt, so it's got to have that pointy tip on it. So how many of those whole leaves are present in a couple of spots across the paddock? And then check again a month later in slower growing conditions. So if you look at the number of leaves and divide by the number of days since it was grazed, that will give you your leaf appearance rate. In most perennial species, a new leaf commences growth when the previous leaf's reached approximately 3/4 of its full length. And new leaves begin to emerge 2 to 3 days post-grazing. So they stick their first little heads up about 2 to 3 days after that first being chewed off. Not all species have the same emergence rate. Perennial ryegrass, they found during some work at the University of Tasmania back in 2006, excuse me, the perennial ryegrass exhibits the slowest leaf appearance rate, with cocksfoot marginally faster and prairie grass the quickest. These were the numbers in green, where it says PRG, perennial ryegrass, equals 23 days. C was cocksfoot, equals 22 days, and prairie grass was 16.5 days. And that was the average leaf appearance rate across their trial period. So it wasn't just for spring or just for autumn or just for winter. It was an average right across. But it's just to give you an idea that perennial ryegrass was the slowest in terms of leaf emergence, and prairie grass was one of the quickest at having their individual leaves come out. So if you're waiting for perennial ryegrass to get to 3-leaf stage and prairie grass to get to the 4-leaf stage, there isn't actually much difference at the point or the days that they need grazing are about where they should be in terms of ideal leaf number for grazing. So that's a little bit interesting. So how does this help with our grazing management? If we wish to graze our pastures at a particular leaf stage, say we want ryegrass to get to the 3-leaf stage to ensure we're maximising the chance of tillering and replenishing the energy levels in the plant for regrowth, if I know the leaf appearance rate is roughly 8 days, that means my rotation should be 8 days by 3 leaves equals 24 days before I come back to this paddock. So that's starting to get me to think about how I could possibly set my rotation. If we move to slide 13. So rotational planned grazing has the benefits of trying as best as possible to juggle what is best for the plant, but also what is best for the stock in terms of feed. So ideally, stock should not graze for more than 3 days. And why is that? As I said before in the previous slides, that the new leaf sticks its head up after 2 to 3 days. So if you leave your stock in there too long, what they'll actually do in a very large paddock is they'll rotationally graze themselves around that paddock. They'll be in one corner for a couple of days, then they'll go off to the far corner for another couple of days. But animals are sneaky. They know that grasses stick that new leaf up after 2 to 3 days post that first grazing. And it is very sweet and tasty. It's like having a bag of lolly snakes next to me that I always want to go and grab. Stock are like that with new little green shoots, and they will be back and coming and nipping those off as soon as they stick their little heads up. And what that does is weaken those plants over time. So if we graze at that point, they'll be quite weakened. So if stock needs to be in a paddock for more than 3 days, consider using a hot wire to back fence if you can while giving them access to water so they don't regraze areas. But I know that's not always possible. We break the rules all the time at home, but sometimes it's about understanding what you're actually doing so that you know you're going to be pushing those plants and actually stressing them out a little bit with this particular grazing, and you know that next time you come around to grazing this paddock, hopefully you'll be able to set it up slightly differently so those plants aren't under as much stress. A demo here, we'll call it a demo, on our farm one winter showed that by eliminating back grazing, we could actually double the growth rate of the regrowth from 9 kilograms of dry matter per hectare per day up to 18 kilograms of dry matter per hectare per day. We just had stock in a paddock for 6 days versus 2 days, basically. So we saw the difference in terms of growth rates by having a larger number of stock stay on the paddock for a shorter time versus a smaller number of stock taking longer to get across the same size paddock. And that really did make a difference. It actually doubled the growth rates by having stock on for a much shorter period of time. But they were off and not being able to graze those new shoots that were just coming up. A demo on a beef farm in central Gippy quite a few years back was a proper set-up demo. Showed by eliminating back grazing they could grow an extra at least 25% feed. So that's quite significant. So sometimes really when we think about our paddocks, how big are they? What are our stock numbers? How long do they need to spend in the paddock? Maybe sometimes the best thing you can plant is in your paddock, a fence post, so that you can actually better manage those grasses and allow them to grow to their potential, give you that extra feed. It's nearly free, really, when you think about it. If you click across to slide 14, grazing before the optimum leaf stage. So if you do graze at this stage, grass growth slows down. As I said, we had regrowth growing at 9 kilograms of dry matter per hectare per day. And you could easily double it to your 18. But grazing before your leaf stage, you're also going to minimise tillering. So, we're saying that ryegrass needs to get out to that 2.5 to 3 leaf stage to tiller adequately. If you graze too early all the time before that optimum leaf stage, you're not going to get that tillering. We're going to open up those pastures. Root and stem reserves of carbohydrates can decrease. Root systems are smaller, plants can be less persistent, and as I said, opportunities for weeds and less desirable species. And this photo that's on there is just a photo of basically set stocking versus rotational grazing and the difference a fence line can make and management can make in terms of what sort of grass is grown. The paddock on the left-hand side was originally part of the farm that's on the right-hand side. It was a cutout around a house that was then sold off, and a bloke bought it and he set stock with sheep, versus on the right-hand side it was rotationally grazed with cattle. So it would have been a little difference in fertility as well. The stuff on the right-hand side was fertilised every year. Stuff on the left-hand side I think was fertilised once in 10 years, roughly. But it just goes to show management makes a big difference as to what sort of grass and the volumes of grass that you can actually grow. So clicking across to slide 15, if we wait too long, what happens if we go past that leaf stage, 3 leaf stage of ryegrass, and we wait to the 4 and 5 leaf stage, and with copsewood, if we let it grow out to like 6 or 7 leaves, what happens then? Basically, we get an accumulation of dead material because they've only got, when you go back to that slide that talked about the leaf numbers, so ryegrass only has 3 active growing leaves at any one time. As soon as that 4th leaf comes out, the first one starts dying off. As soon as that 5th leaf comes out, the second one starts dying off. So you get all this dead material at the base, and stock don't like eating that very much. The dead material can cause shading at the base of that plant, and if you remember I mentioned earlier, the growing point is at the base of that plant. And we need light to get down there to help initiate tillering. So tillering is reduced. Feed quality declines because the stock is sometimes forced to eat that dead material, which doesn't have much feed value. We tend to get poor utilisation for the next grazing. And particularly if you want clover in your system, clover content and seed set can be reduced by allowing grasses to grow rampant. That's an interesting one. You've got to balance up what's best for your own system. Going on to slide 16, if you want to get really, I don't know, targeted with, it's called targeted production, but if you want to get really targeted with your grazing management and really fine-tune your grazing, how much feed should there be in the paddock? And this works for rotational grazing. If you put, how much feed should there be in the paddock as you put your stock in to ensure you don't graze down too hard and also maintain the rotation you need to get the appropriate leaf stage? This equation's come out of the New Zealand dairy industry, but I think it's a great tool for managing our pastures here. This work will work for sheep equally as well for cattle. You decide the rotation length and the residuals you're aiming for. So your rotation length, of course, should just be based on your leaf stage. So when you go to put stock in the paddock, if there's not enough feed, you might assess the paddock and find you're short of feed. But how do we first work out how much feed should there be in the paddock to start with? So in this example, the calculation we're using is the stocking rate, that's the number of head per hectare, times the pasture requirement in kilograms of dry matter per head per day, multiplied by the rotation length in days, plus the residual in kilograms of dry matter per hectare. So as an example, it is a cattle example because I'm a beef officer, so I tend to do all my examples as cattle. If we've got 2.4 steers per hectare and they're weighing 400 kilograms of live weight, and our pasture is roughly 10 megajoules of energy, so green active growing grass, and 52% NDF or neutral detergent fibre. So our maximum intake of those animals based on that fibre level is going to be 9.2 kilograms of dry matter. And you might wonder how I worked that out, and I'll just show you on the next slide in a minute. The leaf appearance rate of the ryegrass is 12 days, so ideally I want a 36-day rotation. And I want to leave behind 1,400 kilograms of dry matter. So looking at that equation, we've got 2.4 head per hectare times by 9.2 kilograms of dry matter per head per day, multiplied by the 36 days, plus our base of 1,400, says that that paddock needs to have 2,195 kilograms of dry matter per hectare in that paddock, so that those stocks leave behind 1,400 kilos, ideally, and I maintain that 36-day rotation, if that makes sense. So when you go to put those stock in that paddock, if there's not enough feed, you might assess that paddock and find you're about 300 kilograms short of feed and go, well, I'm not up to that level of 21.95. That's 300 kilos short. So what do I do? You can use this figure as a guide for how much supplement you need to provide to maintain that desired rotation. Just be aware of the difference in feed quality between the paddock feed on offer and the supplement you offer. So for example, if the grass was 10 megajoules of energy per kilogram of dry matter, and the hay that you were going to feed to fill that 300 kilogram deficit was 9 megajoules, that's a 10% difference in feed value between the grass on offer and the hay that you're going to offer them as a supplement. So you need to provide roughly 10% by dry matter weight extra of the supplement. So in this example, instead of 300, when you assess that pasture and think I'm 300 kilos short of pasture, I'll supplement them with hay. Because that hay is 10% lower in feed value, you're actually going to need to feed them 330 kilograms of dry matter of hay for each hectare in size the paddock is, to maintain that 36-day rotation and to leave behind 1,400 kilos of dry matter per hectare, if that makes sense. That little table off to the side there is a rough estimate of the fibre level based on energy. So if you haven't done a feed test, like ideally you do a feed test to get the accurate figures of your pasture. But if you're pretty good at estimating the energy levels, these you can see NDF percentage or neutral detergent fibre percentage down the side. So if you've got 10 to 10.5 megajoule pastures, you've got roughly 52% neutral detergent fibre. And why is that important to know? Because that tells us how much the maximum intake of those animals are going to be. So if we flick across to slide 17, this is just more of an FYI for you, a quick reference chart for working out maximum intake of your stock. So it includes the sheep, so right down at those 15, 25, 35 kilo animals, right up to your big heavy bulls at 1,000 kilos. So if we look across, and we had that example of 400 kilogram steers, so that's 2/3 of the way down the table, you can see 400 kilograms. And we go across that line, and you'll remember we were sitting on roughly 52% NDF. So there's not a column for that. So if we said, right, they were 55% NDF, they could eat 8.7 kilograms of dry matter. If the feed was only 50% fibre or NDF, you can see they can eat 9.6 kilograms of dry matter. If you want to be exact and you don't want to estimate between that 50 and 55 and you want to use that number 52, look down the bottom of that table. You can see an equation down there, live weight multiplied by, 2 brackets, 120, which is a constant, divided by your NDF. So that's where you put your 52. 120 divided by 52 divided by 100, and then multiplied by the live weight. So in that case, we had a 400 kilogram animal, and that would work out at 9.2 kilograms of dry matter that they could eat. So that's how to use that little table if you ever want to do that. Flicking across to slide 18, we're getting there. Excuse me. Knowing your pasture growth rates. So if you assess your pasture cover in kilograms of dry matter per hectare as stock that leaves the paddock, like I like people to know their pasture growth rates because it helps with budgeting of your feed and also helps monitor how each paddock performs and how the season's progressing. So assess the pasture cover as stock leaves the paddock. And then reassess the cover in the same paddock sometime in the future, such as a fortnight down the track. And calculate the difference in pasture cover. Divide by the number of days since your last measurement. So an example, the paddock was 1,200 kilograms of dry matter per hectare as stock left. Excuse me. And a fortnight later, the paddock was 1,800 kilograms of dry matter per hectare. So our growth rate was 1,800 minus 1,200, divide by 14, says our growth rate was 43 kilograms of dry matter per hectare per day. So if we flick across to slide 19, if you want to do yourself a little feed budget, you're about to put them into a paddock and you want to know how long that paddock will actually last. This little equation here will help step you through it, and that's why you need to know your pasture growth rate. So our example again, apologies, it's going to be steers. I've got 65 head of steers, 65 head of 400 kilogram weight steers. Pasture quality 9 megajoules of feed and roughly 55% neutral detergent fibre. Our paddock size is 5 hectares. Pasture growth rate 15 kilograms of dry matter per hectare per day. Pre-grazing, they're going into a paddock that's got 2,200 kilograms of dry matter per hectare, and post-grazing we want to leave that 1,400 behind. So going across this little table, block A, column A, it's asking what is our available. So the available is the difference between our pre-grazing and what we want to leave behind, the post-grazing or the residual. So 2,200 minus 1,400 is 800. So that's our available kilograms of dry matter per hectare. We then need to know the maximum intake of those steers. So you either use the equation or you use that lookup table based on the energy and the fibre, the size of those animals. We say that they were going to have a maximum intake on this particular feed of 8.7 kilograms of dry matter per head per day. The next column is how much total pasture is going to be eaten per day by the whole mob. So taking it from the individual intake up to the whole mob. So that's just taking that 8.7 multiplied by the 65 head of steers. So they're going to eat a total amount of 565.5 kilos of dry matter per day. So because pasture growth rate is in kilograms of dry matter per hectare per day, we need to find out how much pasture those animals are going to eat per hectare per day. So we take our 565.5 and divide it by our hectare size, which was 5 hectares that our paddock is. So they're going to eat 113.1 kilograms of dry matter per hectare per day. So what's our change going to be? Because over that period of time that they're going to be in that pasture, it's still growing. So we need to take that growth into account. So we worked out our pasture growth rate was 16 kilograms of dry matter per hectare per day. You can see at the top of that sheet. So we take pasture eaten minus that pasture growth rate, so 113.1 minus 15. Then there's going to be a change of 98.1. So basically what's going to be available at the end, excuse me, it got a tickle in the throat, is 98.1 kilograms of dry matter per hectare per day. So the day the feed will last, we just take our available of 800, divide it by our change in availability, and that gives us 8 days that that particular paddock will last. Right, if we flick across to slide 24, just a quick note on using urea basically. Urea is best applied immediately after stock has been removed from the paddock, so it's one way of boosting your pasture growth rates. It's been shown that delaying the application of nitrogen fertiliser reduces the potential pasture response by about 1% per day post-stock removal from the paddock. The other benefit of nitrogen is that it's been shown to promote and encourage tillering. To boost growth and to build a feed wedge in front of stock, consider a one-off application of 80 kilograms of urea per hectare. If you have a moderate growth rate in your pastures currently, you should get a 10-to-1 response from urea. That is 10 kilograms of dry matter grown extra for every 1 kilogram of nitrogen applied. So if you're applying 80 kilograms per hectare of urea, you will be applying roughly 37 kilograms per hectare of nitrogen. So therefore, at a 10-to-1 response, you should be growing an extra 370 kilograms of dry matter per hectare. And this is on top of what's already growing. So if I had a paddock grazed down to 1,000 kilograms of dry matter per hectare, and the pasture growth rate was 30 kilograms of dry matter per hectare per day, in a month's time, instead of being 1,900 kilograms of dry matter per hectare per day, so that's 1,000 base plus 30 kilograms of growth times the 30 days, With the addition of putting 80 kilograms of urea per hectare on top of that, my paddock should instead be around 2,270 kilograms of dry matter per hectare per day instead of the 1,900. On to slide number 21. This is just a little cost of feed in cents per megajoule grown when using urea based on differing response rates. So it's just looking at, is it cost effective for me to actually use urea in my system to get that extra growth? Or would I actually be better off buying in hay to use as a supplement instead? So I look at urea in terms of a supplement to help us grow pasture. In an example here, I've got urea at $650 per tonne spread, and I've got a response rate of 10 to 1. So if you look in that table, you can see that column down the left-hand side, $650 per tonne. Slide across that line to the far side, you'll see a 10 to 1 response. You can see that it's costing 1.41 cents per megajoule for that feed to grow. So that's actually really quite cheap. So 1.41 cents per megajoule of feed that's grown. So if I was comparing that to purchasing in hay to fill the feed gap, if the hay was 9 megajoules per kilogram of dry matter, it would need to cost $108 per tonne delivered or cheaper to beat using urea at that price of $650 per tonne. Although you've got to remember that hay is an immediate feed and you should keep stock of your urea-treated paddock for at least 21 days, minimise the risk of nitrate poisoning, and ideally at least a month to 5 weeks to maximise production from the urea. But that's really cheap source of feed. So any time that you're buying a supplementary feed, you really should cost it out on cents per megajoule to find the best value feed that you can. So urea generally, so long as you've got green, active growing pastures, can be one of the cheapest supplements that you can get for extra feed, if you've got that time to wait that sort of 4 to 5 weeks. If we just flick across to slide 22, nearly there at the finish, just a little note on using gibberellic acid, because there's a lot of people out there interested in gib acid, and is it right for my system basically. So gib acid is a cheap alternative to boost feed growth. It's a natural plant hormone that's present year-round in plants that tends to fall to low levels over the winter period. By boosting the plant levels during the colder months, you can get a good boost in growth rate and the size of the leaf of the plant. If you do use it, you might notice plants go a lighter green to slightly yellow colour during their rapid phase of growth. And this is simply because the chlorophyll, the bit that gives the plants their green colour, cannot keep up in terms of production. It's very cheap. It's roughly $12 per hectare and can be mixed with amine if you're spraying for broadleaf weeds in your pasture. Phalaris is highly responsive. You tend to use a lower rate of 2.5 to 10 grams per 100 litres of water. Ryegrass and cockfoot, you tend to use 10 to 20 grams per 100 litres of water. But there's varying strengths of gibberellic acid out there, so you need to have a look if you're using it. You can get it in a granulated or a liquid form. You need to look at what strength the gib acid that you purchase is and follow the instructions that come with it for mixing to make sure you get the right rate to get the response you like. Be aware that it works best in colder temperatures. So if you have a very mild winter where temperatures are sitting around the 15, 16 degrees during the daytime for a week or two, you tend not to get a response from the gib acid during those mild winters. But the colder that winter, the daytime temperatures are, we find the better the gib acid works. So some years it works and some years it doesn't. But I always reckon at $12 a hectare, if you're going out to spray some weeds or something, it's very useful to chuck some in the tank to see whether you'll get a response. In saying that, it's best for perennial pastures. It's not recommended for annual pastures, for your grasses, and it's also not recommended for new sown pastures either. So if you've gone out and you've sown a perennial pasture this year, you'd be better off using urea instead of gibberellic acid on that. It's just that it's because the root systems of a perennial plant in its first year won't be mature enough this winter to be able to draw out enough nutrition out of the soil to support the extra growth that the gib acid is trying to, or using the gib acid is trying to get it to do. They also suggest final application no later than mid-August because temperatures are on the rise then, and they've found through some research that sometimes applications in late winter and early spring might actually suppress spring growth. So basically that's a wrap, and I'll hand over to Tess now to go through question time. Thank you, Tess.
Thanks, Fiona, for answering some of the questions that are commonly asked around grazing management. I would now like to open the webinar for questions. First, I will read the questions from the webinar platform and then ask our operator to explain how those joining us from the phone can ask their questions. So, Fiona, we've got one here. Where can I find the tools to help me develop a rotation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Basically, I like to tell people that as farm managers, they are the best tool on their property. It's the management of your pastures, what you do with it. You've got the tools yourself to develop up a rotation. It depends how detailed you want to be with it as to what you need. But to maximise pasture growth, basically getting down and counting leaves so you can work out that leaf appearance rate is a really good way of doing it to kick off trying to work out what my rotation should be. So as I spoke about earlier, once those stock are out of the paddock, wait a week to a fortnight, go into that paddock and see how many leaves have started to regrow. You might find that you've got a single leaf after 10 days, and you might just see that second leaf just starting to appear. So you might be saying, well, okay, I've got a full-grown leaf and a tiny little one, so that's really only the one leaf stage. And it's taken me 9 days to get that first leaf fully grown. Come back and check it a couple of weeks later just to see, because sometimes that leaf appearance rate can speed up over time as well. So come back and recount it again, like when it's got its 2 and 3 leaves, and just to check to see what that is. And that'll give you an idea for what your rotation should be for the next couple of weeks going forward. But be aware at certain times of the year it can change quite quickly. You might be going, well, to get to the 3 leaf stage, I need a 36-day rotation. And you come back a month later and you check, and you might be back down to a 24-day rotation a month later, depending on what the weather's been like in terms of temperatures. So that's probably one of the best ways you can do. Also know what residual you want to leave behind, how much your stock's going to consume, what's your likely pasture growth rate's going to be. They're all important too. Basically, a lot of what we've covered off on tonight should help. And don't forget, there's a good old suck it and see method. So if you don't want to be too technical, you can always just take a look at the paddock when you put your stock in and take them out again. Have the stock eaten lower than what you were hoping to leave behind. If they have, particularly if you strip grazing, you can adjust fairly quickly. So if the stock is eaten lower than what you're hoping to leave behind, this means you didn't have as much feed on offer as you thought you did. So next strip, you offer them a little bit more. If they leave too much behind, offer them a little bit less. And it's just sort of changing a very short, not really, I suppose, planning a rotation, but it's adapting to how much you want them to consume and how much you want them to leave behind.
Thanks, Fiona. And another one, how do I estimate a pasture growth curve on my property?
Yeah, that's a good question. One of the best ways, I reckon, is just to measure your paddocks month to month to see how they perform. You probably really only need to do it for over a 12-month period unless your seasons change considerably from time to time. So once you've got a handle on what your growth rates are, particularly for the different seasons, it can be a real benefit for when you're doing your seed budgeting. So we talked about how to assess pasture growth in the paddock by going out and assessing what they've left behind, coming back a couple of weeks later and assessing how much is in there and dividing it by the number of days, so the difference that's actually grown. Excuse me. If you've got a large number of paddocks and you think, oh, I don't want to go out and measure, I've got 40, 50 odd paddocks, I don't want to go out and measure every paddock monthly. One of the easiest ways to do it is maybe pick 6 of those paddocks to monitor. 3 of what you consider your best paddocks and 3 of what you might consider your poorer paddocks to use as monitor paddocks. And just measure those ones monthly and average the figures out after you've done your assessment to allow you to start plotting out a pasture growth curve for your whole entire property. Also, I reckon there's one to keep, a website to keep an eye on. It's not currently up and running. No, pastures from space.fairfiro.au. They recently took it offline last year to revamp it and are looking to re-release it at some point this year. I know some people in the past have used that website to get pasture growth rates for your shire area, so you can see how your place compares to the wider shire. So keep an eye on that website. Hopefully they release it sooner rather than later, because I've always found it very valuable just as a benchmark for our own property, but also sometimes when other people are asking what growth rates might be in different areas, it's easy to go and look up. Another starting place could be the feeding livestock.vic.gov.au website, and look under tools for pasture resources. And there's some links there to generalised pasture growth curves, which are based on, if anyone has heard of Graze as a course that used to be run, there was pasture growth curves developed through that course, and they're available on that feeding livestock website. So feel free to go and have a look on there as well.
And one last one on the question platform is, what dry matter per hectare should my residual be?
Good question. That's really up to each individual and what they're trying to achieve on their property. I guess the only thing I'd say on that is you can't really be too prescriptive on that one, but just remember a residual below 1,000 kilograms of dry matter per hectare, or 3 centimetres, it's going to result in a slower regrowth, and it won't be maximising your pasture growth. So quite often, particularly on sheep, I've seen a lot of targets for sheep recommendations in our drought books and all sorts of places of grazing down to 700 and 800 kilograms of dry matter per hectare. Just think about how much that's eating into the stem reserves of those plants. So if you remember back to that slide that had the photo of the ryegrass that was chewed off to those 3 different heights, and the regrowth that happened between I think it was 700 kilograms of dry matter per hectare versus 1,200 kilograms of dry matter per hectare. It was only a centimetre regrowth difference, but that's quite considerable when you start to add it up over time and over a large area. So just think about what you're doing to your pasture. Normally I'd say, even on a sheep property, I'd be saying try to keep it above 1,000 or at 1,000 as your base as much as possible across the year, just to maximise that pasture growth. Like for dry stock, I'd suggest 1,000 kilos of dry matter per hectare. Lactating animals, I don't care whether they're cattle or sheep, but lactating animals with young stock at foot, I'd probably recommend 1,200 kilos of dry matter per hectare. That's only 4 centimetres. And your trading stock, where you're trying to push animal growth, ideally 1,400 kilograms of dry matter per hectare, which is about 5 centimetres. And that's so that they're eating mostly leaf, which is a high quality feed, and that really pushes animal growth. Anything below that, they start chewing into some of the stem material as well, which can bring back their animal performance. But the most important thing to consider is to monitor your stock condition and just adjust those residuals and feed intake as needed, basically. So, yeah, that's probably what I'd be suggesting.
Thanks, Fiona. And Erin has asked, how do you work out what dry matter kilos per hectare you've got? What tools do you use?
Yep, good one. So one of the things I like using, I don't know whether people have seen, I probably should have put a photo on there on the slides. The NLA Pasture ruler is really good. If you haven't got one, just shout out to, if you've got Tessa's contact details, just flick her an email and she can let me know. And I've got a stash of these pasture rulers from NLA. They're just a little plastic ruler that's got those heights with those kilograms of dry matter marked off next to them. So they're a good one to do. if you're just training your eye for the first time, so once you get your eye trained in, it's quite easy to walk out into a pasture and go, I reckon there's 1,600 kilos of dry matter per hectare here. But that does take a bit of training to get that eye in. And these pasture rulers are great. So doing that toe point method for the first few times, you walk across a paddock, and it might be every 20 steps, and you just put that pasture ruler down in the grass and see how far it comes up that ruler. And you might go, well, that was 6 centimetres, 1,600 kilos of dry matter per hectare. I keep walking across the paddock, do some more measurements, and there'll be varying heights across the paddock. And then I average those heights out to give me that average across that paddock. The other way to do it, and it's tied into it, is we call it the gumboot method. If anyone's got access to the drought feeding books, they are available on our AgVic website and also on that Feeding Livestock website, which was feedinglivestock.vic.gov.au. You can download a PDF version of those if you haven't got a hard copy of the drought book. If you want a hard copy, just shout out and we can mail one out. But it's got the gumboot guide in there on the beef cattle in Chapter 3, and that is the same measurements that are on the pasture ruler. But it can be handy when you're walking across the paddock and seeing how high up that grass comes on your gumboots. So generally when it's sitting at close to the top of the toe of your gumboot, it should be roughly around the 1,700 kilograms of dry matter per hectare if it's nice and thick and dense across your pasture. If it's sort of coming up to, think about where that bone on your ankle is. If it's coming up to that sort of height consistently across your pasture, that's roughly 2,200 kilograms of dry matter per hectare. So, yeah, just shout out. If anyone wants a copy of that pasture ruler, or you can't find where the drought books are, or you want a hard copy of the drought book, just shout out and we can make sure you can find that information.
Thanks, Fiona. I'll now ask Daniel to explain the phone question process.
Thank you, Tess. And our phone audience tonight can queue for a question by pressing *1 on your telephone keypad. That's star followed by 1 on your telephone keypad. We might just pause a moment and see if we can assemble a question queue. But from what I can see, we're not getting any questions coming through on the telephone at the moment.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Daniel. So that concludes our autumn grazing management webinar. Thanks again to our presenter, Fiona, and thank you all for attending. Shortly an email will be sent to you. This will have a link to a short survey. Please take the time to fill this out as it allows us to offer you timely information. A transcript and a recording of this presentation will be available on the registration portal link on an email at a later stage. Before I close tonight, I would like to highlight the third webinar in this series by Agriculture Victoria titled Planning and Designing a 5-Star Water Supply, presented by Clem Sternfeld. This webinar will cover topics such as planning for your future, stock water requirements, climate impacts and basic design. This will be held on Wednesday the 20th of May at 7:30 p.m. For registrations, please contact me by phone 0409 841 492. Thank you and good night.